Welcome everyone, this is Dr. Mercola, and today we are joined by Dr. Stephen Sinatra, who's a very prominent cardiologist and a leader, innovative pioneer in this area and in really implementing natural strategies to the field of cardiology. So we're really delighted to have you here, and welcome.
Thanks, Joe. It's good to be here.
All right. Well, today we'd like to focus a lot of our effort. I mean, it's going to be a dialogue conversation because you're always a fascinating discussion. So maybe if you could, for our viewers who don't know about you, if you could explain your background as a cardiologist and how you came to discover earthing, or grounding as some people call it.
Sure. I actually, did what most of us do, 4 years of graduate school, either DO school or med school or, chiropractic. So I did 4 of med. Then I did a year of internship, and then 2 of residency and 2 of specialized training in cardiology. And when I received my cardiovascular boards in 1977, I met this Jacob Rintz person who was a Dutch chemist. He was 91 years old, and he told me he had the cure for atherosclerosis. He didn't want to get bypass surgery. Long story short, he was my messenger. So back in 1977, after I did 5 years of postgraduate training in conventional medicine, I met this 91-year-old guy who was sharp and erudite and humorous, and he got me on the track to alternative medicine.
Oh,
so I was open back, only when I was 31 years old. He started talking about phosphatidylcholine, phosphatidylserine, magnesium. He was talking about vitamin E, which I knew really nothing about back then.
No physicians did that. There are very few.
We had no training in medical school. So he was the one that opened me up. Then after that, I studied some nutrition, but I became a psychotherapist. I spent 10 years training in psychotherapy. And I studied bioenergetic psychotherapy, which looks at energy blocks in the body. So that really helped launch me even more into alternative medicine. Then I decided that nutrition needed more work, so I studied for the American College of Nutrition exam. That's a certified nutrition specialist. Are you familiar with that? And I studied 2 years for it. And I really pounded the books, went over all the exams, and I realized how much I didn't know. Well, you know what it's like. When you write a book, you realize how much you don't know. You know more about that than most people, right? So I passed the exam. There was 300 short answers, about a 3.5-hour exam. I passed it, and I was really happy. But the process of going on that journey, it's not the destination. It's on that journey I learned a lot. Then I took my boards in anti-aging medicine at the A4M, which was good. And then I started to give the exam. So I had a great background in alternative medicine. I had vitamin and nutritional supplementation, diet, being a cardiologist to work on lifestyle. Then I met Clint Ober 10 years ago.
10 years ago.
10 years ago. And then you got to realize I'm an open cardiologist then. I mean,
What does that mean, an open cardiologist?
Well, I was 10 years ago, I was using CoQ10 for 20 years then. I've been using CoQ10 for 30 years. I've been using magnesium ever since I became a doctor. I've been using the carnitines for 15 years, ribose for 8 years. So 10 years ago, I'm well enmeshed in the psychotherapy, emotional aspects of heart disease, vitamin and mineral supplementation. I'm really there. Now I meet a guy like Clint, who blows me away. And at first I was thinking about Frankenstein medicine. And I said, he approaches me with this grounding, and I said to myself, wait a minute, I was a little skeptical at first.
Yeah.
But then
I wonder if you could address that, because I think that's the logical, rational, scientific reaction to this concept. So I'm wondering if you could help us guide us through your journey in that process.
Well, the process was quick though, Joe. I mean, at first I was skeptical. I said, my gosh, putting my feet on the ground is going to improve, the heart or improve the body and all these things that Clint was talking about. But then I thought about it. I thought about Rintz. And I said, wait a minute, he was my messenger. So the next thing I thought about, wait a minute, let me give this guy a little bit of time. And I spoke to him for about an hour. And then I went from skeptical to being all in. And the way that happened was, look, the heart's the most electrical organ in the body. We're electrical. I mean,
that's not hard to understand.
I mean, for me, it's not hard to understand. We think the brain's, the whole body's electrical. I mean, we're electrical beings. We think we're flesh and blood. That's what we see, but we're really electricity. So after I thought about it, I said to Clint, Clint, look, what you have is a great hypothesis, but you need to prove it. And what you need to do, and I told him this 10 years ago, I said, What you need to do is show that grounding improves inflammation. And if you can show that, then you can show it improves heart disease, because, you know, the root cause of heart disease, I knew it back then, was inflammation. You know, it's not cholesterol like everybody believes. You know, it's really inflammation. So I said, what you need to do is you got to pour, you know, a lot of dollars into research, and you got to bring some animal data to the table, some human data to the table, and if you convince me, you know, I'll help you launch, you know, this mission of yours, which is getting grounded to the earth. And that's how I started with him 10 years ago. He actually mailed me a grounding mattress 6 months later, and I've been sleeping grounded for years. So I'm a big believer in grounding, but then his experimental work was just really awesome. And then I get involved with, you know, research myself. So I'm smack in the middle of it right now, but it took me 10 years.
Okay, so I'm glad you described your journey and your process. Can you tell us, sort of summarize what you've learned in this, and perhaps explain some of the science behind the grounding?
Sure. First of all, when you put your feet on the ground, on the earth, and I had one more messenger on this, I have to tell you.
Okay.
I vacation out on Montauk Point on the beach, you know, and people feel good when they're on beach vacations, you know, and I always thought it was the sun and the electrons from the ocean and everything else and the fresh air. But there's grounding, there's an element to it. And I met this contractor years ago. He was a GC, my age, it was about 20, 30 years ago. And I actually put him in one of my books. I put him in my Lose to Win book, because he ended up developing heart disease. Then when I wrote the grounding book, basically, I approached him again because I saw him on the beach. And I said to him, he asked me, what are you doing? Have you written any more books? I go, yeah, I've been working on this grounding book. He goes, you mean putting your feet on the ground? This is a contractor now who builds, you know, houses. I go, yeah. He goes, well, you know what? He said to me, when he was a carpenter, he worked with a bunch of Scandinavian carpenters. And they all took off their shoes in the morning and walked barefoot on the wet grass.
Interesting.
And he came to work as a young carpenter, and the foreman said to him, he says, hey, buddy, you better take your shoes off, because if you come to work right now with those shoes on, you're going to be busted up in 10 years. Your joints are going to be aching, your muscles are going to be aching, everything's going to be aching. So this contractor was told by a foreman who worked construction and told him to take his shoes off for an hour in the morning. So when I talked to him about the grounding, he goes, I know about that. So it's a small world, you know.
So the empirical wisdom of that community had validated it through their own experience.
Exactly. Yeah. You know, guys slugging sledgehammers and digging and hammering, and, you know, it's stress to the tissues. But if they put their feet on the ground for an hour and had their coffee breaks and took their shoes off, and, you know, it made a difference. So he asked me about the science. Well, I was blown away when I started to read the work that Chevalier had did on cortisol and basically inflammation. And in a nutshell, if you look at, you know, the human body's inflamed. And the reason why we're inflamed is, sure, we have hypercoagulable blood, we got thick blood, we got a lot of free radical stress, you know, we got a lot of positive charge to the body. So, well, what does grounding have to do with that? Well, when you ground, and you take your shoes off and you put them on, like, let's say, a wet earth, not a desert. You're not going to ground too much in the desert. But the beach, the grass, the concrete, brick, nothing man-made like you know, like asphalt. That's not going to ground you, you know. But if you put your feet...
Wood is not man-made either, but it's an insulator.
Well, yeah, wood's not going to ground you. Ceramic tile will, though, you know.
But trees will.
Trees will. Absolutely, trees will. You be a tree hugger. You get grounded good, you know. But what grounding does is basically... The Earth is struck by lightning thousands of times a minute around the equator, right? So the Earth has this unbelievable, enormous negative charge. And, you know, when the Earth is struck by lightning all the time anyway. Then there's solar flares, and there's solar storms, and then there's the sunlight coming through. And basically, the Earth is always electron-rich. So when you put your feet on the ground, what you're doing is you're absorbing all those electrons through the skin. And basically, your body, which is depleted in electrons to begin with because of all the free radical stress, whether we're inhaling mercury or whether we're smoking cigarettes or exposed to insecticides or pesticides or trans fats or radiation, which is sort of a paradox because, you know, too much radiation, too much sunlight, you know, can cause actinic damage. So basically, whatever the factor is, we got a lot of free radical stress in the body, which is really the biggest cause of hypertension right now. We never knew that in medical school. We thought it was something else. But we know that oxidative stress causes disease. It causes inflammation. So now we have this Earth, Mother Earth, that's going to give us all these free electrons. And remember, before I got interested in grounding, I wrote the book Metabolic Cardiology. And I'm a big ATP guy. I mean, and one of the reasons why, and my cardiovascular training helped me connect these dots, because when you bring ATP to the table, and for your listeners, ATP is our chi, it's our energy, it's basically, it's what's allowing me to talk right now and move my hands. When you bring ATP to the table with metabolic support, you are generating energy. Now, CoQ10, which is one of the biggest electron donors we have, helps turn over ATP. So here I am thinking as a cardiologist, well, does that mean if we're taking in free electrons through our skin, through all our acupuncture points in our feet, and through our meridians, are those electrons going to be available to make ATP? And I asked Jim Oshman this, who's a physicist, one of the contemporary physicists of the 21st century. I said, Jim, can I connect that dot? He goes, I think you can. Grounding contributes to healthy living. I mean, if you look at grounding, what I know about grounding right now, and what I know about, the physiological effects, and they are many. Grounding should be part of a healthy lifestyle program. You said it, taking antioxidants, a targeted nutritional support. Whether you take antioxidants in your body that are electron donors, or whether you get electron donors through the skin, what you're taking in and what you're taking in through the skin, taking it orally, taking it through, is going to be synergistic, and it's going to help the body. Whatever antioxidants you're taking in healthy food. I mean, you eat organic as much as you can. I eat organic. Some of us are gluten-free, some of us aren't. But basically, you must bring grounding to the table as a healthy lifestyle. So, healthy air is very important. Healthy food, healthy water. I mean, I'm looking at these waters right now one thing I learned about grounding is that grounding improves zeta potential of your blood, which means, and I can talk about it improves the energy between the red blood cells. Well, you can take water additives that improve the zeta potential of water, so it makes water wetter, so it gets inside your cellular membrane. So what's a healthy lifestyle? Well, it's eating healthy. It's avoiding sugars. It's avoiding trans fats. It's eating organic as much as your time. Avoiding pesticides, insecticides, chemicals. Drinking healthy water. Breathing in healthy air. And getting healthy sunlight, because sunlight is good for you, even gazing into the sun. I'm a big believer in that, for a few minutes every day. I mean, sun gazing is good for you. So in other words, taking in this natural energy is a healing energy, and grounding is another natural energy that everybody should do in their life, because it just makes sense. It's just, it incorporates a healthier lifestyle.
Yeah, it's hard to argue against it, since it essentially has no side effects, and it's something that our ancestors have done for ages. I mean, I guess the basic hypothesis would be that if our ancestors were doing it, then it's likely that we acquired, it became important in our own function, and if we don't replicate those patterns, then we're going to become injured or diseased in some way.
Exactly. I mean, what did people die of 100 years ago? Infections. What are people dying of today? Degenerative disease. So what's happened in the last 50 years? We become disconnected from the earth.
Sure.
Well,
that's an important point, because it's not intuitively obvious to many people. But why don't you review that, because Clint actually had some phenomenal data collection that supports this, and he has some theories as to when this happened.
The rats and the glucose. I was actually talking to Clint about that a few years ago, and what's happened in our society in the last 50 years? I mean, first of all, we have a new generation of kids that are obese. What's it, 37.5% obesity in the country right now? And these kids that are obese, they got insulin resistance.
And double that, or they're overweight.
Exactly. Yes, that's true. But these kids are insulin resistant. A lot of them have type 2 diabetes. A lot of them are even type 1 diabetics. But we have a generation of diabetics right now. We have a generation of kids that aren't going to outlive their parents. So it's going to be the first time in history where instead of the lifespan getting greater, it's going to go back maybe 10 or 15 years, because that's what diabetes does. It robs you of your longevity. So why did that happen? And Clint and I had several conversations about this. What happened in the 50s? Basically, the fast food diet started to come on. I used to be a manager at a 15-cent hamburger stand when I was in high school, you know. And, you know, fast food was okay, but then the trans fats came on, and then the sugars came on. And now we have the supersized sodas. And, you know, a kid can get like 80 teaspoons of sugar just drinking soda in a day, you know, especially if he's in a supersized mode.
Sure.
So, you know, we've had the sugar revolution, hit us in the last 4 or 5 decades. What else has happened? Well, we used to exercise as a generation, but then now we bus our kids to school, and kids don't walk to school anymore. So, and now gym programs have been cut, and so exercise has sort of fallen back, you know, as sort of a not a thing to do anymore like it was. I mean, people don't walk 3 or 4 miles a day. I mean, I walked to school when I was even 8 years old.
So did I.
I mean, I walked. I mean, you know.
All through grade school. High school, we had to take a bus because it's too far away.
Yeah, I mean, so we've taken exercise out of the equation in children. The other thing that we've done is instead of the kids walking on shoes with leather, you know,
Which
or
they did for
sandals
ages.
with leather.
That was
you know,
that was a sole, was a leather sole.
leather sole. I mean, all my shoes were leather when I was a kid. Now we replace them with, you know, neoprene. You know, Clint calls it the Nike generation, the Adidas generation. You know.
Or synthetics.
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 So
Which
rubber
are
disconnects you from the earth.
insulator.
And it makes you 2 inches taller, you know, gives kids a nice bounce in their step, probably prevents a lot of shin splints, probably does a lot of good things, but it does a bad thing because it disconnects you from the earth. And I said to Clint, I said, you know, if we could show in the animal model that sugar metabolism is disturbed by being disconnected from the earth, that could explain why we have a lot of diabetic children. So he did it. He did an experiment in rats that showed that ungrounded rats, compared to their grounded counterparts, had disturbances in blood sugar. They had higher blood sugars. And he also showed in
And
humans.
both groups had the same diet and exercise.
Exact same diet. So he showed an anomaly with sugar metabolism. Now, when I look at something like that and see a disconnected rat with greater blood sugar than a grounded rat, to me that's big. That's big stuff.
Yeah.
That's big stuff. And then in a human model, similar things were found. You know, in biochemistry, and these Polish researchers showed changes in phosphorus and calcium metabolism, thyroid metabolism. There was studies done on delayed onset muscle soreness that showed changes in white blood cells. I mean, what grounding was doing was it was making the human physiology better, so to speak, through all these different experiments, you know, in Poland, in the United States, in Canada, animal model, human model. And then what I saw when I saw all these experiments and I read the materials and methods, I said, man, there's something going on here. And I think the reason why we have a generation of diabetic kids is because we took away the ground, we gave them a lot of sugar, and we don't exercise them, and that's the perfect storm.
Yeah.
And that's the trifecta. That's the trifecta. And then we got this negative EMF going all over the place. And you saw that research which shows that glucose metabolism gets disturbed in the brain, and the more glucose metabolism you have, the faster you age because of, you know, age-related, you know, glycolated products, because the sugar combines with the protein. Now you got a cell phone or a cordless phone, and now you're disturbing glucose metabolism, and what's the biggest cause of Alzheimer's? Really, it's you know, it's more sugar metabolism in the brain. I mean, that's one of the hypotheses that I really believe in. So I think, you know, there's a perfect storm going on in our society, and as parents, we got to get our kids, you know, off sugar. We got to get them back into exercise, and we got to ground them. We got to get them back on leather, or at least neoprene that's grounded to the earth, you know. So here's what happens. You've got these red blood cells that can have diminished vitamin C that aren't functioning well, or you can have red blood cells that are exposed to EMF, where now the chaotic forces are coming in that don't allow the spin. You can have red blood cells that are old, that don't have the spin. Red blood cells that are affected by cigarette smoke, that raises fibrinogen, that clots the blood, that doesn't have the spin, or whatever. When those red blood cells lose the ability to repel one another, they become tired. So it's like being on a traffic jam. Cars being on a traffic jam, they can't pass one another, as opposed to being on an Autobahn where the cars are going like this. Mm-hmm. That's zeta potential. Mm. That's the force between RBCs. And when I learned that grounding increased zeta potential, not 30% or 50% or 100%, but an average of 280%, I said, wow, this is the most incredible discovery, because if you can increase the thinning of your blood naturally by grounding, you can thwart off disease. Not only heart disease and stroke, but I'm thinking cancer, I'm thinking Alzheimer's, I'm thinking multiple sclerosis, I'm thinking any illness that requires good oxygenation to the tissues. So now here's the heartbreak. I was leaping for joy. I told Gaetan, I said, Gaetan, this is the biggest discovery, I think, of the 21st century. This is so incredible. It's unbelievable.
When did you learn that?
2 years ago.
So it's relatively recent.
Oh yeah, 2 years ago. I sent this paper to the American Journal of Cardiology, thinking that they would accept this paper as the greatest.
And get a Nobel Prize.
And get a Nobel, well, I wasn't thinking Nobel Prize. I'm thinking that cardiologists got to know this information because the cardiologist domain is sluggish blood. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's why statins work. Mm-hmm. You know why statins work in a male with a low HDL?
Anti-inflammatory?
It's an anti-inflammatory, but it also thins the blood. See, low HDL thickens the blood. That's why a higher HDL is so important for the cardiac patient, because it thins the blood. Statins, and this is reported in the Edinburgh study and the West of Scotland study, two major studies on statins, where the researchers said that there was something other than cholesterol that was contributing to the benefit of statins. But they were leaning against cholesterol. They said statins literally thin the blood, and they changed what we call the rheology, or the shape of RBCs. So when I found out that grounding, simply putting your feet on the ground or having patches, improved heart rate variability, that was an incredible discovery I've ever made in my life, because living in these times where our autonomic nervous system is on overdrive, we need something to bring us back into balance, and that's what grounding will do. Let me say it this way. You know when people do a lie detector test on you?
Sure.
You can't beat a lie detector test. You got to be really good. I mean, that's why they're 99% efficient, because when you tell a lie, you are betraying your autonomic nervous system. And a lie detector test is a measure of what we call skin conductance. And what grounding does, as soon as you turn that switch on, within a second, there's a blurb on the skin conductance, because it lowers the activity of the autonomic nervous system.
When you say turn the switch on, you mean you're grounded?
Grounded, right, yeah. Because lots of times when we do the experiments, we'll turn the switch on, but the subject is sham grounded. In other words, there's a disconnect. The switch doesn't work. Mm-hmm. So, and we have to do that because in the studies, we want to have a tight control, and basically we want to show that it's not just simple relaxation. Mm-hmm. I mean, look, if I put myself in a chair, put my feet on the ground, and I sit here for 40 minutes to 2 hours, that's relaxation. Mm-hmm. I'm going to get a good response. Mm-hmm. But this is when we ground someone, we get a grounding response to improve heart rate variability that goes beyond simple relaxation. So when I saw that, I said, man, we got to publish this. I sent it to Integrative Medicine, and I'll tell you, the review board made me go through hoops. I had to rewrite that paper, revise it, refine it, and I got to give that review board a lot of credit, because you know, this concept is hard to understand for physicians, especially heart rate variability. But if I was practicing cardiology on a day-to-day basis right now, and a patient called me with angina, you know, a heart cramp or arrhythmia, or their blood pressure was soaring, or they had fear or panic, or if they think they were having a heart attack, you know, I would tell them, okay, if you think you're having a heart attack, chew an aspirin, put your feet on the ground, and call an ambulance. You know, I mean, one of the things I do know is that grounding creates tranquility in people. Why do people go on vacations at the beach? We talked about this before, and they say, "Oh, it's the best vacation I had in my life. I'm relaxed, I'm calm." They're walking on the beach, and they're walking in that salt water. That's a perfect ground, and they're getting all these electrons. And remember, not only is it reducing oxidative stress, but now it's putting the autonomic nervous system in a balance mode, where we're raising the parasympathetic, we're balancing out the overstimulated sympathetic. When we balance our autonomic nervous system, we have more homeostasis. In other words, we're there. We're in a health mode as opposed to a disease mode. So grounding does that, and that's one of the cardiovascular experiments we did. Anything that's going to make the blood thinner is going to improve your health. Now, let's get back to Coumadin. We had patients on Coumadin who were grounding unknowingly. They didn't tell me.
And for the, Coumadin is a blood thinner.
It's a blood thinner.
Commonly used for people who have artificial devices inserted in their bodies or a history of blood clots.
Correct.
And it can save their lives.
Correct.
So you have to be really careful to go off of it.
If you have a metallic heart valve or a plastic heart valve, or if you have atrial fibrillation with a large left atrium and you're leaking across that mitral valve, yeah, you got to take Coumadin. I wear my conventional hat. But I don't like to have people ground when they're taking Coumadin. It's a relative contraindication because we've had people ground taking Coumadin at the same time, and their blood became like water. I mean, it was like red wine.
And then they could
it got really thin, and then that could be dangerous.
Because you get a stroke.
Well, yeah, if you had high blood pressure, yeah, sure. I mean, you could weaken your, if you had a stroke and you had thin blood, yeah, it could be disastrous.
Disaster, yeah.
So we basically tell people, if you're on Coumadin, you must work with your doctor because the doctor is going to have to reduce the Coumadin. Even my patients who were taking Coumadin, when I was still practicing on a day-to-day basis, when I was grounding them, I was cutting their Coumadin levels in half, which is a good thing because remember, Coumadin,
Works on vitamin K2.
It's a vitamin K2 antagonist.
Yeah.
So people on Coumadin at an early age can calcify their blood vessels. So wouldn't it be nice to bring grounding to the table and use less Coumadin